start by using an automated vulnerability scanner. We will look at some other options for vulnerability analysis, but we are going to start with the vulnerability scanner. Some people say vulnerability scanners are kind of like cheating. Some of the courses you might do, they might say you can't use a vulnerability scanner on your test, for instance. It's true that a skilled pen tester should be able to replace the vulnerability scanner. We should always do manual analysis. We should always verify our results manually, but like many things with computers, they can do tasks very quickly that are repetitive and dull and require a lot of input. Same thing with vulnerability scanners. Basically give it a database of possibilities and checks of how to try it, and it can do lots of checks rapidly, whereas we can only do so many ourselves, and it can, of course, remember everything. So I think that they're quite useful. If you do any professional pen testing, no doubt you will find yourselves working with vulnerability scanners a lot. So I would definitely encourage you to know how to use them at the very least. We're going to use one called Nessus. There are certainly others. You're welcome to try others as well. If you have access to either a free version or your work or school has a license for others, by all means, feel free to use those. So we're going to use Nessus. This is Nessus Home Edition, so the free version that you should only use for your home purposes. So we're just going to use it on our local network. So we're going to do service Nessus start, and that's not right. It's service Nessus D start Nessus daemon. And so that starts that up. So that's like our service Apache 2 start that we did in our Linux section. It just starts up the Nessus server. Nessus is not installed on Kali by default. In your setup instructions, I showed you how to install it. So it does have a command line interface, but it also has our web GUI. So that's going to be listening over HTTPS, and it's localhost, so 127.0.0.1, and that port is 8834. That's Nessus's port. And see, this is Nessus Home. There's a Nessus Professional Edition. Nessus Home is going to be limited in what it can do, and it is free, whereas we have to pay for our Professional Edition. So I made my username Georgia and my password. Again, don't use password as your password. But if I don't do that, then I forget them. So I always use them for classes, but don't do what I do. Do as I say, not as I do. So the Nessus interface may change. It has gone through a lot of changes since I've been using it. So by the time you run this, you may find that your interface is completely different, but the way it works will still be the same. You have policies, and in this case, you actually have to create a policy. Some of the ones that I've seen come with policies already in them, so it really just depends on what you're going to get. I think it may be the pro version versus the home version now, because I've seen it come with policies recently, and this is a fairly recent install, so you may have policies, you may not. But if you have to create one, just go to new policy here, and this is going to be what kinds of checks and things that Nessus is going to run. So I'll just say new policy, and all sorts of different stuff here, like credentialed patch audit. A lot of the times you do this, like if you're on the internal security team, you can give it like domain admin credentials, and it'll log in everywhere and check internally. So it won't only find network-based vulnerabilities, but things like out-of-date iTunes and out-of-date Flash and other things that might lead to a client-side attack, which we'll discuss a bit later. It'll be able to find that as well. Let's just do basic network scan. And I'll just call it Georgia's policy. Georgia's policy. Next. Choose a type. Internal works. We're not going to do any authentication. Again, that's if we want to log in, which you may find your clients have you do that. You do like configuration reviews where they give you credentials, and it logs in and checks the registry and such, but typically we don't do that. We have a policy, so we need some policy. Again, it may come with policies, it may not, and if it does, then you can use one of the built-in ones or create your own. And if we go into advanced mode here, we can see like plugins. Like by default, it has brute force attacks disabled. That might lock out accounts and even bring something down. So that would be checks that might be detrimental to the environment. So those are turned off by default. Some other ones are disabled. Like there's some things for mobile devices. We don't have any mobile devices here. Doesn't have too much for mobile devices. A few things. And policy compliance is off, so we could turn on compliance checks if we were logging in. But a lot of things are already on, so you can, go in and enable specific plugins as well. I mean, I'll just use the default, but as you use this more and more, you may find that there's specific things that work well for you. Like printers are always a disaster with Nessus and other vulnerability scanners because they print out smiley faces and stuff. So if your client doesn't know entirely what's going on, you might get a call about why did all the printers go off in the middle of the night and start printing out pages. So I was once on an on-site security team for a while where we did a periodic credential scan, check the patch levels and such in the environment. And then, one day we decided to go try and find all the printers in every floor we went to because we were trying to put them on a VLAN by themselves, which they should have been anyways, but they weren't. So that was our task. But every floor we went to, people would be like, our printers spit out all this stuff once a week. So it's not really that big a deal, but wasting paper. So we'll just, again, leave it as the default. So now we're going to run a scan. Do new scan. Georgia's scan. And we're going to use Georgia's policy. And we can upload a targets file. We only have 2 here. 3 if you want to do the Windows 7 target as well, but it won't really find anything. But of course, we can just type them in. So mine are 192.168.1.76 and 192.168.1.80. So those are my 2 targets, my Ubuntu and my Windows XP. Again, you can put the Windows 7 in as well. I just leave it out to save time in the video because it's an example of a more complex target. It's patched. It has some issues on the website. And we'll see it in client sides and such as well. But from a network perspective, it's pretty up to date. So our scan is running. And we can actually see it in real time. See, it's 0% done, but we're already starting to see vulnerabilities here, lighting up orange and yellow and blue. So we can see here, blue is info. Looks like we've got a medium high, and it looks like we just got a critical as well. So you can see them coming in. We can click vulnerabilities up here to see all the vulnerabilities, or see them by host as we were, and just see vulnerabilities for a particular host. So I have these set up specifically for classes so that there will be vulnerabilities that the vulnerability scanner will not find, that we will have to find with other methods. You might find that in those cases, stuff is going to get missed on your pen test. If you've got a really large pen test and not that much time to do it, the possibility of you doing manual checks against every single port in the environment against thousands and thousands of hosts in, say, a week of night testing, it's unlikely, so things may get missed. The vulnerability scanner is not going to necessarily find 100% of the issues in the environment, but it will give you a lot of possibilities very quickly. So it is also prone to false positives. Again, you'd rather have it say it's there and then it not be there, than have it not say it's there and then it be there. So it is prone to the false positives, plus sells more licenses if it finds 1,000 vulnerabilities than if it finds 6, right? So that makes sense. We always want to do manual checks before we do any reporting on this, assuming it's allowed. I mean, certainly you'll probably find clients who just want you to run a vulnerability scan, say this is a vulnerability scan, and be done with it. It's good money for basically clicking a button, so again, no reason not to know how to do that. I mean, everybody does it. It's not as fun as pen testing, but again, it's easy money. And a lot of clients are a little bit afraid of the scary pen testing. So, let's see. So, we're still running here. We got 5 criticals here. It looks like PHP is out of date. Looks like we got MS09 SMB vulnerabilities. Lots of stuff here. Unsupported operating system, VSFTPD, smiley face backdoor. Did we talk about that already in our information gathering section? I think we did. I think we talked about that the version number 2.3.4 for VSFTPD was the correct version to possibly be vulnerable to the smiley face backdoor. But we weren't sure because the version number didn't change after the patch or before it. But Nessus seems to think that it is there. Nessus actually seems to kind of exploited it, because again, all you have to do is give it a smiley face in the username, and it said that it gave us root access, so we should be able to exploit that during our exploitation phase, no problem. And also over here to the right has more information, so exploits are available, and it says there's one in Metasploit, but we'll find that we can do this manually just as easily. So it looks like that one's done. Denial of service. We're probably not going to want to run any denial of services. It says network file system share user mountable. We did see the network file system port. Didn't really look at it yet. It looks like there's a share called Export Georgia. There's the contents here, partial content. So that might be something we'd want to take a look at, see what's in the network file system share. It may be nothing. I mean, again, like printers to come up again, like sometimes they have network file system shares that have really nothing interesting in them. You'd think, oh, it's got old print jobs in it. And maybe, depending on the configuration, but it may just as easily be like nothing. So you may find network file system shares that really get you nowhere in terms of the pen test, or you may find a gold mine, which, this being a pen testing class, you know, chances are that's going to be something we want to take a look at. Let's see, cookie disclosures. I mean, the kind of stuff that we would probably verify and report on, but I mean, like track trace isn't going to get us domain level access, for instance, but I mean, these are things that we generally report on anyway. Look at the other one. Okay, it looks like we're done. So let's see. Got a lot of criticals here. Looks like we've got some out-of-date Apache, out-of-date PHP. It looks like it's Windows XP, which is unsupported, which it wasn't unsupported when I started teaching this class, but you'll be surprised how many Windows XPs and Windows 2000s you find lying around. And Linux is even worse, really. It's like, at least you find people who have administrators who can do Windows boxes. It seems like a lot of times they install the Linux system and then the Linux guy leaves and they never update it. I find stuff that's like 20 years old on the Linux all the time. So if anybody ever says that my classes don't matter because we use out-of-date operating systems, well, one, we're going to use up-to-date operating systems too, and also I find these all the time on my tests, all the time. Like in the last week I've done a couple tests and I found XP and 2000 on both of them. So, of course, it's all true. And our favorite MS-0806.7, we already saw this one actually in the Metasploit module where we learned how to use Metasploit. This is always the exploit that I start with. It's another one of those where people are like, oh, it's MS-0806.7, it's so old, but still works. I see it unpatched internally a lot still, even today, and it only takes one. You know, it's got one box that's unpatched, and then it's a member of the domain, and, you know, local admin password that is everywhere else. It could be game over, which we'll talk about that a bit later on in post-exploitation, but I mean, it really only takes one missed system, and when you're looking at thousands and thousands of them, it's really easy to forget something. If you're not doing this periodically and checking for vulnerabilities, there's really no way you would know. Again, some out-of-date Apaches. I mean, some of this is just that things have updated since I built the images. But, I don't know. Yeah, it looks like a lot of out-of-date Apaches. OpenSSL. Well, we found a few things here. I mean, it looks like we know that MS-0806.7 is exploitable. We saw it with Metasploit, and that's always going to be one we'll look out for, because we know if we find the MIS08067, it's something that can give us easy system privileges, so we'll always want to try that one if we have permission to exploit. We already know how to do that, so you can check back to the Metasploit section if you want to see it again. So, I mean, a few interesting things here. We might be able to find something like for Apache. Looks like there's Metasploit modules for some of these Apache things. I always find that the web server ones are really not that easy to get to exploit nicely. Like, especially when they say heap overflow or heap-based buffer overflow. We don't even cover anything heap-based in our exploit development section. If you continued studying exploit development, you'd get to it, but it's a little more complicated than our stack-based exploitation. Things just don't tend to work quite as nicely. So you might find that those are hard to get to work, so generally don't go for exploiting those unless I don't really worry about bringing stuff down. Of course, in our lab, we don't have any problem with that at all, so by all means, feel free to run whatever you feel like. Like this one says exploits are available, but it doesn't have any listed. So we'd probably have to use exploit code from the internet, which of course we need to be careful with. So we did find a lot of interesting information very quickly here, and with little effort. Really, we just had to click go, and that was that. So again, I did design this such that there's going to be other stuff that we can find that the scanner didn't find that is going to be exploitable, but I would always encourage you to run the vulnerability scanner and at least see what you get out.